I took this really strange cooking class several years ago. I don't remember how I signed up for it. Only that I found out about it in a way that was different than what you might expect to hear about a cooking class. It wasn't from a flyer. I didn't read about it in an advertisement. It wasn't at a local establishment that was famous for cooking classes. It was from somebody in a non-traditional network group that I belonged to that recommended it. She only told me that I would get a lot out of it. It wasn't even in a place where you would expect to take a cooking class. It was a 2-day class, 8 hours each day. Nearly the entirety of the first day was spent on the history and chemical makeup of the spices we were going to use. We sampled each one, and I was certain I had made a big mistake. Each one of these spices was not only completely new to me, but each one smelled and tasted like nothing I would want to mix with anything I was planning on eating. The only way to learn anything is by trial and error. It doesn't seem this way since we've all been essentially brainwashed by modern educational systems. We somehow think the way to learn something is to sit and listen to somebody talk or watch somebody do something. But in reality, the only way to learn something, really learn it to the point of unconscious competence, is to practice. And practice is just another way to say trial and error learning. We have somehow been so brainwashed by our modern educational system, we don't even like to say the word error for fear of getting yelled at by an authority figure in front of our social peers. One of the most perplexing biases is something called survivorship bias. Survivorship bias is essentially the idea of only seeing what is successful among perhaps millions of unsuccessful competitors. For example, it's often thought that if you want to achieve success, all you need to do is study excellence, to study that which exhibits the behavior and success you'd like to achieve. But this is impossible, because any success is only the final product of many years of competition. Not only do you need to know what that person did to become successful, you need to know what all the other people did so you can avoid doing that. Even worse is often the person exhibiting the success really has no idea how exactly they became successful. Every star athlete that is famous, for example, is the survivor of hundreds of thousands or perhaps millions of failed athletes who wanted to be successful just as much as they did. Chaos theory says that any system that has 2 or more polynomial variables will be impossible to predict. This was discovered once they had computers strong enough and powerful enough to simulate weather patterns. They set the initial conditions, let the computer simulate a couple of weeks in computer time, and saw the results. But then they went back and changed the initial conditions as little as they could, but the resultant weather patterns 2 weeks out was completely different than the original one. They found that by only changing the initial conditions just a teeny tiny bit, the result just a little bit out would be dramatically different. This essentially means that trying to predict the outcome based only on the initial conditions is impossible. It's called chaos theory because even though the system is described by known, measurable, and repeatable scientific laws, they absolutely cannot predict the outcome more than a few steps out. This means that at any given time and in any system, simply knowing the present condition does not give them the ability to predict the future outcome. All systems then, with more than 2 polynomial variables, will behave absolutely unpredictably or chaotically. This has nothing to do with quantum physics or our ability to measure any current conditions based on any scientific limitations. This is true in purely constructed mathematical systems. Even though we can measure the current state of any system, this does not mean that we can infer the past state or predict the future state of any given system. The one thing we can reverse engineer from successful people and groups is their tendency to keep moving forward no matter what happened. We can't predict what will happen, nor can we understand anything about their past that made them successful. All we can do is apply basic strategies of behavior like trial and error learning. Simply stated, if you have a clear direction and a strong enough desire to get there, and you are willing to try anything and learn from the result, this will be a much more likely strategy than trying to copy what somebody else did. Of course, this presents an obvious problem. Very few of us can accept a lot of risk, and it is very compelling to be told exactly what to do, even though taking a risk, accepting inevitable failure that is just as likely as success, is the only path to success. It seems to be something so few of us are naturally capable of doing. At the end of the second day, when we put everything together, I was utterly flabbergasted. None of the spices on their own would have been something I would have voluntarily eaten, but when they were combined, they created a taste so sublime, so wonderful, I can't actually believe that it happened. Everybody felt that way. Everybody wanted to know how she learned to cook so beautifully, but she only told us that you have to just get into the kitchen and experiment. Unless you are willing to do that, you will be metaphysically chained to a cookbook for all eternity.